This is Dr. Jerome Corsi, and today is Friday. It's August 25th, 2023. Thank you for joining us. The big story that's captivating, I think, all of the news today is Donald Trump's arraignment in Fulton County over these charges of election interference, or whatever the charges specifically. It's hard to exactly determine what they're basically charging him for. Trying to overturn an election which was obviously rigged, and at least raising questions about it, which is legitimate. I mean, if you can't say I want to question this election, then Al Gore should have been put in prison in 2000 when he questioned the Florida demanded a recount, and that went on for months. He didn't get to prison. Now, Donald Trump's mugshot, I think, is historic. I think this is going to be, and he published a whole statement on this on the internet, on Twitter, now X. And he said basically that he's never going to surrender, that he's going to fight this. This is election interference, and he looks fierce. Now, this is going to be an historic shot. And in the New York Times, what they were writing up, and this was a Vanessa Friedman, a kind of an editorial, said as soon as it was taken, it became the de facto picture of the year, an historic image that seemed that seared into the public record and referred to for perpetuity. It will be referred to for perpetuity. The first mugshot of an American president taken by the Fulton County Sheriff's Office after Donald Trump's fourth indictment. Though, because it is also the only mugshot, it may be representative of all the charges. As such, it's a symbol of either equality under the law or abuse of it. It's a symbol of abuse of it. Come on. New York Times, wake up. These charges are completely ridiculous. The Democrats, when Donald Trump was elected in 2016, the lawfare group, Larry Tribe and the whole lawfare group, and Harvard led this whole using the law to defeat the law, to fundamentally change the Constitution, to rewrite Supreme Court decisions, to defeat conservatives. This lawfare in 2016, when Donald Trump was elected president, tried in the certification of the Electoral College. When the Electoral College met, they were trying to get Hamilton electors, which would be people who would not vote for Trump in the Electoral College, even though Trump may have won the state's vote for the president. Now, that was not considered election interference. It was applauded by the left. So we become so highly politicized and so highly corrupt that we can have Biden in the White House as a completely bought and paid for, billions of dollars. Justice Department does nothing. Tries to get an indictment that will be a plea deal, and the plea deal basically exonerates Hunter Biden of everything. The American people are seeing through this, and I think it's disgraceful. Now, Chris, let's play this clip, and then I want you to comment, because these two things are very similar. There's a nurse who's got a posting today on on Rumble, and I'd like you to listen to a minute for what she says. Can we play it, Chris?
I work for a large hospital system in Broward County, Florida, on the anesthesia team. Last night, the house nurse manager came to my department and told us that we must prepare for a COVID crisis that's going to start next week. And the hospital will be taking part of our recovery unit, anesthesia recovery unit, to house COVID patients. And that we cannot allow surgical patients' families to come visit them, which we do pre and post surgery, pre and post anesthesia. And I looked at her and I said, how do you know you're going to need our rooms, our bays? And how do you know there's going to be a crisis next week? She tilted down her glasses. She looked at me and she said, You know what's going on by now. And I said, yeah, I do. And everyone else just went, oh, here we go again, and shrugged their shoulders. Does anyone else find this really strange besides me? It's about time that this whole corrupted, stinking system is brought down. Seriously. Because I'm really hating my job right now. I can't stand this corruption anymore. Please share.
Okay, now I think this is an important statement because this is a person who's honest, and she is appalled that her supervisors know in advance that a pandemic is going to come back again, which makes it sound like a scam-demic, a scam, another architected narrative by the globalists, the left, these neo-Marxists who want to control people, shut down the economy. It'll be disastrous. So far, there's not very many cases of this ERIS, or this mutation. And if there are, it's flu season. We're going to have people who get the flu. When COVID was here, we didn't have any flu cases because everything was COVID. If you died in the hospital, it was COVID, regardless of why you were there. Now, if we're going to go through the masks again, and we're going to go through the lockdowns again and all this nonsense, I don't think the American people are going to go for it. I think we saw already once that it was not effective. It was destructive to families. It was destructive to kids going to school. It was destructive, period. And that's all the left neo-Marxists can do, is they can only destroy. And I think if we go through another one of these, we're going to find that people are increasingly aware of the corruption, and it's going to become now focused by Donald Trump. That picture he took, he's coming after the left. He's coming after them. They indicted him. They threw down the gauntlet. He's taken the challenge. He's going to beat them. That's what the message is. And he's going to, in the process, do it righteously. In other words, he's the one who's being falsely accused. And if he doesn't win, we don't have free elections anymore. We don't have a free society. We don't have a First Amendment. He's being charged in some of these cases in the federal courts under an Espionage Act, which is 1917, was passed in World War I. The only significant person it put in jail in that time was Eugene V. Debs, who was a labor leader, the railroad unions. He was a socialist, gave a speech in Dayton, Ohio, which he said he didn't want to participate in World War II. He didn't like the idea of steel bayonets going through bodies. And they put him in jail. He ran for president from jail and got 1 million votes. Donald Trump is on the verge of a huge electoral victory because there's no one who can beat him at this point. Now, they may run Michelle, but there's a lot of baggage with Michelle. They've been doing a makeover with her, and Joel Gilbert has been right about this. His videos and his book on it cover the makeover, making her look more gentle, following the Obama path, getting books, rewriting her life story the way she wants to tell it, and positioning her. It's all positioning, more lies, more narratives. She's a radical Marxist, and she's been that way since she was young. And if you can remember the 2008 campaign, Michelle was a problem for Obama because she did get a stage and she did say what she really believed. And she's very angry, got a lot of hatred in her soul. Then it manifests. Now, these people have got to be stopped. And the way to stop them is with the truth. And so I want you to comment in a minute, Chris, but I want to point out that it's motivated me so much. I'm not retired by any means anymore. So this is the next book coming out, The Truth About Neo-Marxism, Cultural Maoism, and Anarchy. You can pre-order it on Amazon. I've got my first copies of it. It's another big book, but it really shows how these people are Marxists, how they drive narratives, how they believe in subjective reality. Thank you, Chris, for showing that. Also, it follows exactly, and it's the same format. It's the second volume of what I'm calling the Great Awakening Trilogy. I think what's going on right now, just as that video of that woman, is giving Americans a chance to waken up, not be woke, but wake up and realize that we are being architected into slavery. by a group that has learned to take manufactured crises and lock down, control. With the technology they have today, they can do massive surveillance. They want to create a state like China where everybody's under surveillance 24/7. And it is not a way to live. In fact, it will be a dystopian future. And China is already suffering economically. This whole economic system they've created on fiat currency is going to crash. And that's the other book I've written, which I'll comment on in a minute, but it's about the coming global crash and how it's going to create an historic gold rush, which is in the process of happening. Chris, what do you think of all this corruption and what that woman said in that video and Donald Trump's mugshot?
Well, let's put it this way. A lot of this is preparing us for what's to happen in 2024. Part of this is, hey, you've been locked down before. We're going to prepare you and ease you into this one this time instead of make it immediate to get everybody all riled up and angry, knowing what happened last time. That's why you see these things trickle in. That's why you have a couple of colleges instituting mask mandates again. This is why you have a few hospitals doing so. That's going to increase. This nurse is speaking out from the grassroots and expect a lot more. But remember, this is only part of the whole thing. In 2000, the idea was to keep people from 2020, excuse me. The idea was to keep people from assembling and talking to each other, lock people in their rooms, and censor the internet so you really couldn't do a lot of the internet exchanges as well. The idea of the red mirage that was written kind of gradually for about 2-3 months, as far as, the first day it's going to look like Trump won, but in the next 3-4 days, it's going to be a blue victory.
Yeah, you have the voting going and voting. Trump's ahead in the voting, and then there's a stop, and
right?
And then the Democrats suddenly bump up, and they're above Trump in the count because they've boosted those ballots enough to get above Trump's curve.
So in a roundabout way, I'm saying they're trying to normalize lockdowns, normalize the idea of them, normalize high gas prices, normalize separating people from each other gradually. So when it's politically convenient for decades to come, the government can do that. The next few generations won't bat an eye.
Well, in fact, they'll be used to it, and it's a conditioning. And they're also saying, even the New York Times is running a story saying that elections aren't democratic anymore. Elections are the foundation of democracy, and we don't really have a democracy. We've got a republic. This is not a democratic government. It's not majority rule. There are supposed to be constitutional rules. The Constitution says that only state legislatures can change the mechanics and the rules for presidential elections. Well, that wasn't done in 2020 at all. They had mail-in ballots, which they're going to engineer again. These are inherently designed to cheat.
But normalizing it and normalizing the cheating.
Right, because we can't have everybody, we've got lockdowns. We can't have everybody go and vote.
Right.
Or talk. We've got social distance.
Right.
We can't have everybody go to rallies because that would be too many people all together at one time. All these things are intentional. And now the pattern of their intention can be seen, which is clearly to just like the climate change. The single factor that carbon dioxide is the whole reason we have global warming is absolute nonsense. And any legitimate climate scientist can tell you this. I ran an article this week on American Thinker following two of the most eminent climate scientists, Will Happer and Richard Lindsay, I'll get his name right in a minute, who were saying essentially that water vapor is 70% of all global warming agents, greenhouse gases. 70% are water vapor. It's not carbon dioxide at all. And if we eliminate carbon dioxide or try to do net zero, yes, that's the article right there, millions of people are going to die. That was the one about how it's a neo-Marxist narrative. I had one yesterday about how it was climate change is really going to starve millions of people. That was the one I did yesterday. It's probably still up on the homepage, Chris, down in the previous days. If you look just go to the homepage of American Thinker, scroll down, and they have the previous days. So it'll probably be there under yesterday. can see my name. One of the will kill millions of people. Will the new EPA regulations starve millions of people? And these two, hold on a second, Will Happer and Richard Lindzen, two professors emeritus, are saying essentially that there are Supreme Court rules which these agencies are not allowed to cherry pick the science for their ideological point of view. They have to consider all the science in making rules. And APA did not do this because there's abundant science that says that this global warming is a hoax. Now, if we find out that the pandemic is also a hoax, that COVID was made in a laboratory, all the stories coming out about the U.S. being involved in funding with Fauci and others, they're getting royalties. We now know this. I've been saying this since 2020. Fauci gets royalties on various discoveries they make or articles they make that lead to pharmaceuticals. They get paid on the pharmaceuticals. At the NIH, they say, oh, this treatment here works for this disease. And then somebody makes a pill on that or a vaccine or whatever, and they get paid millions of dollars. This is another scam. There's too many people in the federal government who've learned how to print money with the federal government and steal it. And the Bidens are at the top of that list. And the American people are becoming aware of it. Now let's go to the next couple of stories, which are focusing on Great Britain. I could have done this focusing on any number of countries. Germany, could have done it in Italy, could have done it in the United States. But what's happening is going on essentially worldwide. And what it is a number of people who are sleeping in the streets, who are basically not able to. London has what they call this rough sleeping. Now, rough sleeping, what it means is that you have people who are just putting down anything on the street anywhere. They don't have a tent. They're not homeless. They're not actually, they just have a mattress or sleep on pillows or whatever they can find or in doorways. They're just sleeping out in the rough. This is opposed to people who are really homeless, have set up little camps as homeless, or are in shelters. Now, the statistics are that more than 10,000 people sleep rough in London between April 2022 and March 2023, marking a 21% increase from the previous year. And this is a tragedy. I mean, you're finding that the cost of energy in Great Britain has been extreme, and they're suffering massive inflation, just as we are here. The cost of living is placing an increasing number of middle-class Great Britons on the street because they have nowhere else to go. And those, with the COVID-19, when it had all this money going out, relieved some of the pressure, but now the COVID funding is drying up. And if we have another round of COVID scare and we produce more money to hand out to people to keep them going, we did in 2020 and 2021, what's going to happen is that will cause massive inflation. Because now we've got over $33 trillion in national debt. As we keep printing money, we are only going to further devalue the currency. You look at take $100 and look at what it bought at the grocery store 10 years ago compared to how little it buys today. It's shocking. If you buy meat or just the ordinary things, you can spend $200-300 easy at a grocery store and don't have that much to show for it. Now that squeezes the middle class. The middle class gets squeezed, a country becomes unstable. Gasoline prices are again getting high. We're at the Labor Day is coming up. People will be traveling. Then we're going into winter. Global change, climate change is happening because it's seasons. The earth is tilted. We have seasons. We're going to have global cooling. It's going to be called autumn. And then we're going to have global freezing. It's going to be called winter. And if we have a mild winter, it isn't because of carbon dioxide. It will have much more of an impact because of El Nino, which is these water currents that are coming up in the Pacific, replacing the La Nina. El Nino is warmer, And as such, it's going to cause the United States to be warmer this winter, most likely. We are also in a very circular orbit around the Earth. We're not in an elliptical orbit. We're in an interglacial warming period. All these factors contribute. Carbon dioxide is largely insignificant. My point in my article about carbon dioxide is it's important for the growth of plants. And so therefore, the carbon cycle, if there's more carbon dioxide, it's greener. You pump carbon dioxide into a greenhouse in order to encourage the plants to grow faster and bigger. It's fundamental. But people aren't taught science any longer. They aren't taught the fundamental chemical equations, and people are easily misled because they don't have the intellectual background to know they're being lied to. All right, now I'm going to couple that with the next story I did in Great Britain, which is they're getting flooded now, Great Britain is, with these asylum seekers. So the asylum backlog has now hit 175,000. What's happening is that they're coming across in the English Channel from Europe in boats. And they're coming from a variety of the countries, including Ukraine and all these other countries. The massive population shift going on in the world right now. So in Europe, you had first a massive number of people coming out from Syria and from other of the Middle Eastern countries that were under war, going back a decade or more. And they fled, and they come across the Mediterranean in boats, and they hit Europe. And Europe has now got a significant population of Middle Easterners. And the religion and the cultures are different. They're largely Muslim. Okay, and now out of the Ukraine, Russia's depopulating Ukraine because they're destroying the cities. There's no water, there's no electricity in much of the area that Russia occupies. Russia is not giving this territory back. Russia has Donbass. It has the eastern part of Ukraine, which has always been Russian-oriented. It's got the coast down by the Black Sea, including Sevastopol, the great port, where the naval operations for Russia are centered, in the Black Sea, Crimea. And Russia's not giving this up. And Russia's in defensive positions that NATO is not going to dislodge. Okay, so the European invasion now is including a whole group of people from Ukraine, from various of these other countries that are undergoing dislocation, Romania and the others, in this whole area of Europe, which has been experiencing war and disruption for 200 years, probably going back farther than that if you really want to search history. Ukraine has been a battleground probably for centuries, going probably back into the 12 or 1100s, and contested by many different people, including the Germans versus the Russians. And that's really what this current battle is about, with Victoria Nuland and these other leftists in the State Department wanting to put Ukraine and NATO right on Russia's doorstep. In the United States, we're having massive immigration from the Spanish. Now, I've always wanted legal immigration. I happen to think that with the country going as secular as it is, that the Spanish are possibly the future of America because they still believe in God, when the American people have largely abandoned God in increasing numbers. And it's frightening to think what a godless people are capable of doing and how godless people are capable of destruction. And that's what, hopefully, the immigration that's coming in will be a rebirth of the United States, and these people will assimilate. Their children will learn English and Spanish. We are going to see a population shift that's coming from the southern hemisphere up to the northern hemisphere, and it's going to continue. We're in a sea change, a paradigm shift globally, which the United States is not going to be dominant as it has been since the end of World War II. We're going to see massive changes where the United States is in a multipolar world. India and China and the United States are going to have the three largest economies. China, Russia, and the United States are going to be the three largest military superpowers. And China will take Taiwan. China took Hong Kong. No one did anything about it. China will take Taiwan. And I doubt if the Biden administration will do anything about it. Secretary of State Blinken has already said that he's not going to defend Taiwan. these are major, major shifts, and we're headed towards World War III if these neocon demons in the Biden administration. They always said the neocons were, George W. Bush. They've tried to make them Republican. They're just simply this group in the State Department. Victoria Nuland on the left was engineering, along with George Soros and others in the State Department, these color revolutions. We had sweeping North Africa. We had the Arab Spring. Remember that? And the Maidan rebellion in Ukraine. These are all State Department engineered. And they were disruptive. They overturned governments. They destabilized. We're into a period of time that reminds me of the 1930s. We've had a prosperity. We had prosperity going back really to George W. Bush, much more so than today. I think both the Clinton and Obama were putting us fast track on neo-Marxism. That was destructive. And we started spending these billions and billions and trillions of dollars. $1 trillion is a lot of money. If you really think what it takes to get to $1 trillion. And it's not going to stop. Federal Reserve is going to be out of control. And the standard of living is going to deteriorate because of the cost of everything. The costs are now wildly out of relationship to what people are earning. And people are going with second and third jobs in order to keep up. When those don't work, you're stuck. And the middle class will start collapsing. When it does, you're going to find the country to be very unstable. Donald Trump, I think, is going to be front and center opposing this. And my recommendation would be to send the entire bureaucracy of the federal government to Death Valley and let them have all the wind and solar they want. Chris, your comments?
Well, there's plenty of wind coming out of Washington anyway. They didn't want it near Martha's Vineyard, so that's where they have it.
Well, yeah, I mean, you got Obama buying a property right on the ocean there in Martha's Vineyard. I guess he's not worried about global warming. He's not worried about the sea rising. He knows it's all nonsense.
That's the idea. Push everybody away from that. So the few, as John Kerry would put it, special people get to scoop up those properties.
Yeah, well, the elite, the World Economic Forum, which is the end game here, the neo-Marxist woke will be in every Marxist revolution. There's always this vanguard that is out there, the Cultural Revolution in China, where the youth destroy the traditional values and the traditional education, traditional elders. They ridicule them, they destroy them, they try to destroy God. And the oligarchs then take over, and all of these radicals are either they shut up or they're imprisoned because they were just useful idiots to destroy. That's the whole point of neo-Marxism. And what we're seeing, this last story I want to cover this morning, the BRICS nations now are meeting. They're having a summit in South Africa. And they've just invited Saudi Arabia, the UAE, United Arab Emirates, Iran, terrorist country, Argentina, bankrupt country, Egypt and Ethiopia to join the BRICS. Now, this is the very first level of expansion of the BRICS, because the BRICS were Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Now you're getting a whole group of these oil-producing companies to come in. Iran is going to be part of. Now, they're not going to be able to be sanctioned any longer because Russia and China and Iran will do workarounds. They don't need to use the SWIFT system. They will probably create their own currency and produce it with gold backing. Certainly Russia is hinting this is where the BRICS are going. So the inclusion of Saudi Arabia and Iran, which are some of the world's largest oil producers outside the United States, this is Beijing's brokering of the normalization of relationships between Saudi Arabia and Iran, Tehran. And India was initially reluctant about expanding BRICS, but they warmed up to the idea that that the UAE and Egypt are going to be strategic defense partners for India, which has always had classic border problems with China. And so resolving some of these internal conflicts, the countries that are now going to be BRICS, is going to make them a much stronger alliance. And you're going to have a very strong competing alliance with the United States economically and politically and military, and also in military senses. The technology that Russia is demonstrating on the battlefield in Ukraine may now be superior to what we're capable of doing, because they're coordinating satellite imagery, GPS, global positioning, advanced missiles, and a lot of firepower that does not involve combat troops, drones, and the like, that can hit from a distance accurately. And Russia can monitor the tanks that we supply, monitor from the time they get there what's going on from the sky, the satellites. They can control the battlefield. And the Ukrainians do not have this capability. I'm not sure we do either, to the extent that Russia has it. Russia is now using it, and they're perfecting it. You're going to see how it works. We are not doing that. We're worried about running transgender parades with the military down Fifth Avenue. They can probably do that better than they can fight a GPS war. It's divisive. It divides people on race. It divides people on all kinds of issues, which is what critical theory does. Now, if you just read some of the books I'm writing, I would implore you to. I mean, you can get free the coming global crash and how it's going to create an historic gold rush by calling this 800 number, 800-520-6268. That's the number you call to get directly in touch with Swiss America. I implore you to get some of your IRAs and your 401ks in gold. Gold is up over $1,900 now, $1,940, I believe, $1,944 an ounce. Gold gets over $2,000 and holds. Will be on to a new level. Two of the biggest manipulators of the gold market, from J.P. Morgan Chase, were arrested this week on crimes manipulating the market. So two of the most successful people on Wall Street. And that's going to put throw a big wrench into the intentional manipulation of gold to suppress the price. Once the gold traders realize that their game is up, and I think part of the reason they are being turned in is that many countries like China have been stockpiling gold, and they see that in the future these fiat currencies are going to crash. They're not backed by anything except the full faith and credit of the United States. The United States just was downgraded in terms of our credit worthiness because there's increasing doubt that we will be able to really pay off the interest on the debt except by printing more money. And that's inherently inflationary. We're putting in place inherent voting procedures that are inherently fraudulent. That's the mail-in ballots, the harvesting of ballots, the way these computer systems work. And Donald Trump is right to challenge them. And he has a legitimate right under the First Amendment to do so. The indictment of a president who is the chief political opponent to Biden is absolutely disgraceful. It's a very dark day in American history. And Donald Trump looks like he is an avenging force of justice in that picture. He's coming after them, and he should. Now, I resisted when they wanted me to give a plea deal in the Mueller investigation because they thought I had a tie to Julian Assange. I did not. They were put me in front of a jury in Washington, and the Justice Department said you'll be in prison the rest of your life. I said, if that's what you want to do, go ahead and do it. I'm not going to stand in front of God and a judge and lie to save myself from going to prison. They never indicted me. Well, Donald Trump has God's hand on his shoulder. He will prevail. So we are facing intentional putting in place, not by state legislatures, but by boards of election or by state governors, procedures that are inherently fraudulent. They don't want to have voter ID. They don't want to have anything that would legitimate the vote and restrict their ability to cheat. And similarly, in the economy, it's being engineered to fail. The Federal Reserve, which is meeting right now out in Jackson Hole, is going to continue to raise rates. They don't have a choice. They have to cause a recession. Otherwise, the inflation is going to be so out of control. And if they do this pandemic nonsense again, which I'm sure it looks like they're going to try to do, we're then going to be in a situation where it's going to be very difficult to have a legitimate vote. I think the American people are getting sick and tired of it, are seeing through it, and are demanding that we go back to fundamental values, which include God at the center. Chris, any comments?
Sorry, I got caught trying to pull something up in the back here.
No problem.
Yeah, let me get on this here. I still am a little skeptical about take two. I'm still a little I'll wait till the coffee's down. Sorry. Take three. I'm still a tad skeptical about this BRICS currency, especially now that they're bringing in other nations who are ideologically opposite each other. They're going to have some problems in the future. Some of them are very, very financially unstable, while others are going to be carrying the load. This sounds like it either could end up being like the euro, where a couple of other countries are going to want to wise up and bow out later on, or something that could really, really be something that nations outside of the BRICS may not want to invest in, considering who's there. China's history of currency manipulation notwithstanding, that's another issue altogether. The more I read about this BRICS currency, whether it be, even though it's gold backed and probably more stable than the fiat we have, I have a lot more skepticism by the day.
Well, I mean, I understand that, and I think you've got a legitimate point. But what I'm seeing is a paradigm shift. In other words, the EU, I've always been opposed to the EU because it was put in stealth fashion. They said it was going to be a coal and steel agreement after World War II. It was not going to be
Eurozone, yes.
Then they had the Eurozone. It was a open free market. They lied. They were always going to create a super government and a currency over all these nations. And you can't put the European nations together. In a sense, they've been fighting historically going back to about 1200s, if not earlier, fighting against each other. It probably began when the Roman Empire was still in its heyday, with the Germanic tribes beginning to invade, and French tribes and all the rest of it, the Gauls. So, I mean, Europe is a mess, always has been a mess. These countries also don't get along all that well. Iran is Shiite, and Saudi Arabia is Sunni. They're fundamentally different. They're both Muslim, but they are fundamentally at odds in their interpretation of what Islam is. So again, there's lots of differences here.
The only uniting factor, though, is there is an anti-American sentiment among many of these nations. That's not going to last a few years down the road.
Well, you might be surprised because the one thing these countries have in common is that they are all emerging economies. And as when you were dealing with the European countries, you had some very advanced economies that were just weak, but they were old, and populations were old. Here you've got countries where the populations are thriving. None of these things are going to be easy. Birthing a new paradigm is like birthing a child. It's going to be painful, but there are certain forces that indicate to me that the structure we've been living under since World War II is coming to an end, and American power is now, we've sufficiently self-destroyed enough of America to destroy the culture that we are in a period of decline, and that's not going to be easily reversed. But any last comments, Chris?
It should also be noted that China, again, we talked about the currency manipulation, they're hardcore communist. Ethiopia, hardcore Marxist, okay? South Africa, we don't even know what they are from week to week, but I do know that it's the carjacking capital of the world, if I'm still correct on this one. India may be the most stable of them all, and they still have their troubles. This is going to be unless these nations find a way to get along and get together, this currency is going to see a lot of issues. I mean, again, this is my opinion. You could take that to the store with a nickel and get a nickel's worth of goods. But the idea is I'd keep a very close eye on this and wonder if the next few American administrations will take this that seriously. Same thing with the European Union. Are they going to let this happen? Are they going to let it fall? Or are we the ones that are going to be bailing these nations out when they fail? That's another thing we have to look for. The globalists might like this.
Well, by 2050, if you look at the future, United States, China, and Russia, United States, China, and India are going to have the largest populations, and they're going to have the strongest economies. It's not going to be Russia as a strong economy, and some of these other countries are going to be far behind. So, I mean, there's a lot here, but the BRICS nations as a whole are going to be an increasing percentage of the world's economy and an increasing percentage of the world's population. And the idea of going to a gold-backed currency is inherently the only solution that I can see to ending this fiat currency nonsense. If you give politicians the right to print money, they're going to do it, and then they're going to steal it. And the entire Congress is bought and sold. I mean, I listened to that debate and watched Chris Christie be booed. I didn't actually listen to what was going on. I watched a baseball game instead. But I listened to
sort of. It was the Mets, right? So it's sort of baseball.
The Mets are the Braves. So it was one of the best teams in baseball versus the Mets. And so at any rate, it's going to be very interesting, and we're going to follow it, and we're going to report on it. Let's wrap up, Chris. I don't want to go much over time. This is Dr. Jerome Corsi. Today is Friday. It's August 25th, 2023. TheTruthCentral.com. We're emphasizing the truth. TheTruthCentral.com. Thank you for joining us. In the end, God always wins. God will win here too. I just fear what it's going to take. Today at 5:30 in the morning, a storm hit here, and it was one of the biggest booms I've ever heard in terms of a thunderstorm. And if you want to interpret some of these things as the hand of God, some of the things that happen, I begin to look at, I don't think God's very pleased with where we are as a country. And join me getting down on my knees, and for all of us, spirit of 2 Chronicles 7:14, let's ask God to forgive us for taking God out of our lives, out of the schools, out of our homes, out of our marriages, and allowing so many babies to be killed in the womb. Millions. Disgraceful. In the end, God always wins. Let's be on God's side in this battle, asking forgiveness. Thank you for joining us. The Truth Central will be back on Monday. God bless.